Much confusion originates from the Bible, because of the so-called free will, and of its presumed coexistence with one God's will. While religions try to make sense of their own words, the fact remains that one divine will, or destiny, would not be compatible with any free will. It is one of the two, not both. Clearly, the perception of free will exists, but are the choices we make really our own, or are they also planned beyond the concept of time? Is it possible that every movement is predestined and predictable, as in the rising of the sun or the animal behavior, for all forms of energy, except our own? Most people have no doubts that we are the writers of our destiny. But imagine you are reading a book, and one of the protagonists on page 24 is about to go home, tired from work, when a friend calls to meet him. You may think at that point that the person had a choice, to either go home, or see his friend. But when you get to page 25, you will see that no matter how many times you read that book, he will always make that same choice. One book, one choice. Is there maybe one book and one page 25 for all of us? The will implies also the concept of a future time, within which that will can become manifested. Hence, it is the concept of time which needs to be evaluated in relation to human will. Is the will before time, or beyond time? Keep in mind that beyond time, the concept of before, does not exist. To believe in God is to also believe that about 14 billion years ago, God shattered the stability with a movement called Big Bang, and only from that moment on, the concepts of time, space, and movement started to exist. There are no time and movement if there is no space. There are no space and movement without time. There are no space and time without movement. But if one of these three exists, also the other two exist. As God generated that first movement, simultaneously God also created space and time. God's idea, cause of the initial movement, is mother of these three concepts. In a dimension that also unifies the concept of time, the future is like the past. And in such dimension, there is no free will. Imagine God's idea as one point that unifies all the time, space and movement since they started to exist, and also imagine God having the knowledge of every event in history. For example, God knows of a tyranny, which occurs before a revolution, which occurs before a certain war, and so on. For God, and beyond time, all events are reunited, in one same instant. Now, imagine God to decide to bring life to the world, and to manifest this idea. On a single instant, can there be life, or can any idea become manifested? Surely not, for there would be no time in which changes could occur. In one such idea, conceived in a state of stability, life is like a deck of cards thrown up in the air by God, and falling back on God's hands, without the presence of time. All cards must necessarily move in only one way, to define that singular idea. As to say, that all of us are like those cards thrown in the air, and that even if only one of those cards were capable to change its movement, because of one presumed free will, then that divine idea would no longer be the same. One book, one choice. Then, what about the perception of free will? The same law of attraction, quantum mechanics, that moves everything in the universe, also moves our perceptions. This complex form of inner magnetism, common to all human beings, is instead confused with one fallible human perception, free will. our induced perception of free will, allows us to live the same events as protagonists, instead of as spectators, but does not change the episodes of destiny. In fact, the events not always coincide with our alleged will. In each individual, the result of all perceptions that meet at one time, and in a given space, could only result in one precise movement. Our presumed free will is then also our only possibility. On page 25,